All right, joining us now, one of the key players in the whole White House discussion on tariffs and, of course, the economy is the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, Mr. Steve Miran. Steve, thanks for coming on. Appreciate your staying up late tonight. It's not so late, really. So just clear this up for me. I'm getting conflicting advice. With respect to the 10% baseline tariff and with respect to the so-called reciprocal tariff charges, is it both or is it one or the other?
Thanks for having me, Larry. It's great to see you again. Look, you know, the 10% is sort of a floor. So what the president has done has decided that other countries are going to pay a tariff similar to the totality of trade effects they impose upon our exports. And there's a 10% floor on that. And so it could be 10% or it could be higher. But the president campaigned on, the president promised to make trade fairer for Americans. He promised to make American workers on fairer ground vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And he's doing that.
So I was going to ask you, China at the top of the list. I've got the color chart, and I appreciated the president putting that chart up in the Rose Garden. So USA discounted reciprocal tariff on China's 34%. China charges to the U.S., which is tariff and non-tariff barriers, is 67%. This thing is 34. Now, when I look at the 34% that we're going to charge them, this is a kinder and gentler President Trump. Do I add the 10% baseline tax or not?
No, you don't. You don't add the 10% baseline tax. The 10% baseline tax is for companies. Is for countries that would have is a minimum that countries would pay to avoid transshipment problems, to place a minimum, to put American workers on fair ground.
All right, I get it. No, I just wanted to clarify it, and we appreciate it very much. I figured you're the smartest guy in the building, so certainly you will know about this. Talk to me for 1 second about transshipping. You know, we had former Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross on the show Monday evening, and there's a lot of cheating that goes on. And specifically, you know, China so we may tariff China, and China may not be able to sell, but they will sell to Mexico, and then they'll sneak their stuff in underneath the domestic content rules of USMCA. How do you stop that, Steve Miran?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic point, and it remains a significant problem. You know, China not only failed to live up to its Phase 1 agreements when it made a trade deal with the president the first time, and continues to cheat, lie, and steal from America, but they go out of their way to avoid the tariffs via the transshipment that you're describing. So it's of critical importance not only to crack down on transshipment, but to take a worldwide approach to tariffs, as the president has begun to do with the reciprocal tariff program, which by looking at trade balances with individual countries, the president is addressing transshipment in that manner.
Talk to me about Mexico and Canada. Now, the 25% tariff, but if it's USMCA, okay, then there is no tariff. They would have a 10% baseline in lieu of that, or how's this going to work on our neighbors?
Yeah, so I believe what's happening is that Mexico and Canada are not part of this program. I believe that they are part of the other USMCA specific programs, including the Canada and Mexico fentanyl tariffs, as well as the auto tariffs, which will affect them as well. So
if they are compliant with USMCA, they're okay, they're clean, no tariff.
I'm not an expert on the trade law and the trade implementation, but I believe that's the case.
Yeah, I think
we can follow up with USTR. Yeah,
I think yes, we can either do that or call Bob Lighthizer, or somebody's going to know about this. I get it. How about the estimates of potential tariff-related revenues? I've seen, you know, 600 billion, 700 billion. There's a lot of money there. Have you done any calculations, you and your colleagues at the CEA?
Yeah, so we have looked at it. I don't have a precise number for you right now, but what I will say is that it's maybe in the area that you were discussing there, maybe closer to 500. We'll have a precise number in coming days. But what's really important is what you do with that revenue.
Yes.
And that's a really nice side effect of tariffs. Look, the tariffs are aimed at the national emergency, but the revenue is a really nice side effect, and you can use that revenue to help pay for tax cuts, to pay for the extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and there's even enough to pay for the further tax relief that the president has promised, and potentially more.
Steve, this is the most wonderful thing. This is music to my ears. I can't believe how beautiful you are saying this. I raised it with Speaker Johnson, who is a supply-sider, and he said he'd think about it.
Yeah.
I don't see what, now I know this stuff's not going to happen overnight. I get that. But if you're making estimates of revenues from various sources, right? These 10-year estimates. Maybe they're not worth the paper they're printed on, but everybody in Washington uses them. If you're going to, plug in $500–600 billion a year, to me, that's new tax cuts. Heck, I'd lower the personal income tax. I'd lower the corporate tax. I'd lower the payroll tax. That kind of thing. Is there a discussion about that, Steve Miran?
No, look, I mean, I absolutely agree with you. I think that those are fabulous ideas. And I mean, what could be better than tariff revenue paid for by foreigners that's used to cut taxes on American families and American companies and American firms, right? What could possibly be a better combination than that? That to me is an idea that can help usher in the golden age. And I think that there is a conversation around further tax relief that the president has promised, that the president has emphasized: no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. And given the scope of these tariffs, there ought to be some additional revenue left over. What we do with that revenue, well, that's between Congress and the president.
Yeah, music to my ears. Steve, let me ask another question. You've written about this down through the years, the fate of the dollar exchange rate. Now, I'm going to put gold aside for a minute. The dollar is very weak. All currencies are very weak against gold, but I'm going to put that aside. I believe you have written, and some others, when these tariffs are applied, dollars become a little more scarce, and not as many. The trade deficits are lower, dollars are more scarce, and the value, the exchange rate of the dollar goes up. Now, you can tell me if you still agree with that. And then, to me, if that is true, if the dollar is going to go up against these other currencies, then that would help to subdue any inflation or price pressures, would it not?
Yes. So there's a lot to unpack here, and both in theory and the history of empirical evidence in the economic literature is that the dollar should move in response to the tariffs. Now, that's the one issue is that's an all else equal statement, and there are a lot of moving cross currents that are occurring now that weren't the case in 2018, 2019. In paramount among those is our attempts to reorient the economy from the Biden administration government-fueled economic growth to more sustainable, durable economic growth driven by the private sector, right? And that has had consequences in the economic growth data and will continue to have consequences in the economic growth data, which are causing cross currents and also affecting the dollar and getting a little bit in the way of that at the moment. Now, when it comes to who pays for the tariffs, at the end of the day, the person who pays for an economic policy is what economists would call the more inflexible person. And the example that I like to give is if you're buying a house. So you're looking at a town to buy a house, and then the town raises the property tax rate. You can just decide to move to look at the next town over. But the person selling the house can't pick up the house and move it. You're flexible. The seller is inflexible. The seller has to lower their selling price to eat the property tax.
Well, the same thing. I love that. Look, Kevin Hassett and I have talked about this for years. I mean, I think I like to use China as the exporting nation, but the exporters who are hit by that, they're going to have to eat half of it. They're going to eat half of it. I think that's what the evidence shows.
They'll eat much more than half because they're inflexible and we're flexible because we can substitute to home production. We can substitute to different countries to import from. The countries that have built their entire economies around exporting to the American consumer have no substitute. They are inflexible. They will eat the burden of the tax in the long run. And what that means is that they ultimately pay for the burden of the tariff. Now, there's a couple ways that can happen. It can happen through the exchange rate. And part of that played out in 2018, 2019, or they can just lower their selling prices.
All right, last one.
But one way or another, they'll pay, yeah.
Last one. It's a good answer. Last one, real quick. How concerned are you about short-term cost increases, short-term price increases?
Look, at the end of the day, this is a historic change in tariff rates and a historic change in policy that is standing up for American workers, standing up for American companies, and putting America first and on fair ground against the rest of the world for the first time in decades. Are there going to be short-term bumps as a result? Absolutely. But what the president is focused on is a long-term transformation and improvement in the durability, sustainability, and fairness of the American economy with respect to the rest of the world.
Well, I would just say, you know what I would say? I'm sorry, we're short, but you know what? Let's see what happens. Let's keep our powder dry. People are jumping to conclusions left and right, up and down. Let's just see what happens, Steve Miran. You're doing a great job.
Most importantly is that the effects of tax cuts and regulation are going to be incredibly disinflationary.
I've said and written as much. Steve Miran, thank you, my friend. Appreciate it very, very much.